And now to our esteemed panelists joining us today, Mr. C.K. Mishra, former Secretary in the Ministry, Professor Frank Kelly, visiting professor at King's College London, Dr. Dedolap Fasawi, General Manager and CEO of LACEPA in Nigeria, Dr. Tariq bin Yusuf, Chief Town Planner for Dhaka North City Corporation, and Dr. Vivek Bhatia, Medical Doctor and CEO of the Thyssen Group, India. Welcome, all of you. But first, here is my brief take. One of the silver linings of the ongoing COVID global pandemic has been the unanticipated reduction on air pollution stemming from the lockdown of cities and communities across the world. As the lockdown progressed, satellite images showed dramatic declines in greenhouse gas emissions resulting from significantly less cars on the roads, the decline in industrial production, and the halting of human burning of fossil fuels. As people from Beijing to Delhi to Los Angeles moved from shock to marvel at the blue skies and cleaner air overhead, they all wondered alike whether this could last. That is the topic of today's webinar. How can we keep our skies overhead blue? Is this even possible? The truth is the skies are mostly always blue, but our activity here on Earth produces so much pollution that we prevent ourselves from seeing that. Unless, of course, you're lying on a nice beach somewhere in the Caribbean or in the South Pacific. The deeper question here for us to consider really is this. What are the policy lessons from the impact of the COVID lockdown on air quality in Commonwealth countries? What happens next? Perhaps the biggest challenge is in placing priority for the economy over the environment, and the precedent after the 2008 economic crisis portends that we are likely to see greenhouse gas emissions return to their pre-lockdown levels and to keep growing beyond that, unless we act decisively to prevent this happening. The matter of air pollution has been an area of consideration for the Ramphal Institute, and in 2018, the Institute convened the first annual conference on air pollution in megacities. That forum found that air pollution harms all ages, that it is a silent killer, and that it affects not only physical but also mental health. And get this, it is linked to poverty and social inequality. The 2018 forum put forward a number of recommendations, including the need for greater political urgency by framing poor air quality as a public health concern and espousing a rights-based approach to clean air, and also by exposing that the nexus of inequality and air pollution makes this an issue of social justice. These are fitting themes given the long overdue global awakening to systemic inequalities that have been triggered by recent events in the United States, thereby exposing the raw truth that racial and other forms of discrimination are embedded in the economic, political, and social fabrics and structures of countries all over the world. At the Ramphal Institute, we believe it is now pertinent that together we find ways of returning of justice to society, and we believe that the upcoming Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting and COP26 will provide valuable platforms for pursuing agendas that will prevent us from returning to the old normal. The webinar today is aimed at just that, and is part of a wider set of initiatives by a revisioned Ramphal Institute. Going forward, the Institute will be launching a number of other innovative activities and initiatives that explore how inequality manifests and is handled in different corners of the Commonwealth, and also how the leadership of different Commonwealth countries over the decades have helped to redress this while shaping the organization's evolution. The Ramphal Institute has refreshed its approach of gendering discourse and interchange around current and emerging challenges to the Commonwealth, retaining its focus and founding DNA on the areas of social and economic policy, governance, and environment. We invite you to join or support us on this new journey as we illuminate the Commonwealth and bring fresh insights into its continuing place in a rapidly changing world. Thank you. I look forward to an exciting panel discussion today. And let me hand over now to Mr. Koliru Krishan, Chair of Fitch's Climate Change Committee and also Chair of the BRICS Council, Business Council and Working Group on Energy and Green Economy, to give us a few welcoming remarks. Mr. Krishan.
Mr. Krish.
Mr. Christian, you have to unmute yourself. David, maybe there's some technical issue perhaps at his end while we try to check with him. Would you like to? I can see Mr. C.K. Mishra has joined us as well, but Mr. Christian is, I think, gone offline. Maybe he's facing a technical problem. Would you like to then invite Mr. C.K. Mishra to make his address, and maybe Mr. Christian could join in later?
Certainly, Mr. Mishra, are you there with us? Could you please say a few words of welcome?
So Mr. Mishra is our keynote speaker today, and he's the former Secretary, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Government of India. He just retired from that post on the 31st of May. And under his leadership, he has led the climate change negotiations from India, also the negotiations under the Montreal Protocol. And during his tenure and leadership, the National Clean Air Program was also launched. So we are very delighted to have Mr. C.K. Mishra with us. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Rita. Sorry, I couldn't really join earlier on because there were some technical problems. Happy to be with all of you. Thank you, David, in the beginning. And I'm told Krishan is not yet here. But it's a pleasure joining all of you. And let me welcome all the distinguished panelists. Let me also thank Ramphal Institute and FICCI for organizing this. And I must mention that these are very challenging times when we are together here. And we are talking about one of the most relevant things, that's air quality around us. This has been a thought process for a very, very long time. And I hope now that in these challenging times of COVID, when a lot of lessons are being learned all across the globe, we start thinking differently and looking differently at issues relating to air quality. Because if we continue to look at it the way we looked at it earlier, I think we are not in for getting good results. So we need to really, really look at it differently. And this pandemic, I think, has raised certain issues. What it has done is that it has raised questions of life and death. And it is exactly this question that air quality holds for us. It's not a question of only environment and clarity and blue skies and what have you. It's a question of life and death. So we need to really look at air quality in this context. And I'm extremely happy that we are not just talking about India, but all the Commonwealth countries put together. So we've expanded the scope because at the end of the day, it is this exchange of ideas and things that will help us move ahead. So as I said, this is a very apt subject today, and everyone seems to be talking about it. Everybody seems to be looking at blue skies and everybody seems to be admiring it. But each one, is there something that somebody was speaking about?
No, please go ahead, sir.
Okay. I have a feeling that everyone who's been looking at it has been looking at it from his or her viewpoint, which may be different from somebody else's viewpoint. One of the major things that we need to note here is that nature is the biggest protector. But it is the protector only if you protect nature. If we decide to destroy nature, we should not expect to be protected by nature. And the fury of nature, no science can handle. So we need to be very clear in our minds in these days of pandemic of what nature can benefit us and what it can do to destroy things. In the Indian context, let me just place this in context that India is one of the largest mega biodiverse countries. And a country with very low per capita emission, a late starter or late entrant into the energy consumption scene. And therefore, we need to draw a different kind of a picture for different countries. Air quality in a developed country with all the technologies and other things in place is likely to pose a different problem than what it poses in India, for example. And India is about, is about conservation, is about forest, and it's basically about Indian culture. So we associate issues relating to nature and environment with our culture. Let me just get back to what we were discussing, that everybody is talking about the impact of lockdown on air quality. And why just air quality? On a larger issues on environment in the entire world. Globally, people have been posting various pictures on social media and saying that this is the best thing that has happened. We've seen newer birds, we have seen larger migration of new species of birds, we are seeing clear skies, which we have not seen for very long. But I would just like to pause for a moment and pose a question. We have seen very clear skies and blue skies, which we had not seen earlier, but this has come to us at a huge, huge cost, at a huge human cost. The pandemic and the lockdown has brought it to us. I don't think it is worth the cost. We must learn that this should become a regular affair in our lifetime and should not come to us as a learning at such a huge cost which the globe today is facing. So I would like to kind of differentiate between the two arguments, one being that the lockdown has brought about this, and the second being that we do not and should not need such lockdowns to really see clearer skies and blue skies. We need to move away from that argument. And this caution we must carry in all our thinking towards environment whenever we talk about it. And this again brings me to my original point, that as long as a human race, we protect the environment, protect nature, we will stay protected. And there could be no bigger lesson than this. Things have been happening. It's not that nothing has happened. And things have been happening in the recent years. But what is that one single factor which clearly distinguishes air quality after lockdown? So what is it that did not happen during lockdown? If there is one thing that did not happen during lockdown, is combustion. You had no industries running, you had fewer vehicular movement, and that resulted in reduction in emission due to combustion. So one thing we know because of the lockdown is that our problem is combustion. How do we control vehicles? How do we control industries? How do we control emission? What is it that we need to do? And as I said, things have happened. If you look at the past couple of years also, globally, for example, renewable energy is now contributing close to 40% in the growth of the primary energy sector. That's a huge, huge contribution of renewable energy. And let's take energy all over again. Globally, the carbon emission for energy grew in 2019 by only 0.5%, while earlier, through the decade, it has been growing at more than 2%. So these are good signs. Now let us look at it in the Indian context for a while. Renewable energy has recorded the fastest growth of close to about 10% in India. And it accounts for close to 15% of the growth of energy consumption. And what has led the way is the way India has handled its solar program. The solar growth is about 27%. So in this entire power energy mix, things have happened. But as the lockdown and the pandemic shows us, it's not enough. We need to do really more. And it's not even that the emissions have not gone down. If you look at the overall carbon emission growth, it was about 1.1% in 2019 against, I think, about 5% earlier. So the point that is being made here is that we do not need a pandemic to clear skies. We do not need COVID to tell us that we must have a better air quality. We've been trying for it. We know the path. We know the way. And last 2 months, what they have taught us really is that how good it can get if we really work hard on this. And this is the point, I think, which must remain central to all our thinking when we talk about air quality. Let's take another example now. Let us take one of the biggest criticisms globally, and many of you who are representing Commonwealth countries and other countries have been talking about it, is the air quality of Delhi. Now, Delhi air quality today is absolutely the best of the international standards. But if you look at the pre and the post lockdown periods, there's been an analysis by IIT Kanpur, and they clearly show that it is power, biomass, and vehicle which has contributed to either the adverse or the better ambient air quality that we have in Delhi right now. So then, I'm sure the panelists will be discussing all the technical aspects of it, so I'm not getting into it. But as a larger perspective, as a strategy, what is it that we together as countries should be looking at in terms of a strategy? First and foremost, I think it is time, and this has taught us, that we need to move towards renewables in a big, big way as source of energy. At some point of time, fossil fuels will have to become redundant as far as our growth story is concerned. There has to be development, there has to be growth, but I'm fully convinced that there can be no debate on the fact whether development and environment can coexist. They can certainly coexist. And it's one of the best way of moving ahead. Better fuels for vehicles, for example, e-mobility, all these factors will help us reduce combustion. But the main thing will be that when we talk about power plants, when we talk about energy, when we talk about emission, what is it that we need as the biggest input to improve things? I think it is green technology. All countries will have to now invest in green technologies to bring down emission. I mean, everybody will have a problem. But then once we know the solution, I think everybody must make that effort at least. There are two critical issues which I must point out when we talk about green technologies. First is the resource, second is the technology. Resource is something which globally we have tried to figure out if we can collect enough resource. We have not really succeeded. I think it is time that individual countries started allocating resource to this. We have no option. I don't think we have the luxury of waiting for a very long time for a big global support in this direction, whether it's the UNFCCC or whichever support that we are talking about. So countries must focus on resources. The second is technology. Unless we have technology, we will not be able to do it. And I think in terms of technology, the best thing would be that technology barriers across the globe must break down. If that does not happen, countries will have to bring up newer innovations, newer local technologies to help local emission reduction. And we will need to continue to push it till we come to an end. So if I am to wind up and say what is it that the lockdown and the pandemic and the air quality connect, and what is it that we have learned, the biggest clarity because of this lockdown we have today is we really, really know who is spoiling the environment and what is spoiling the environment. It is we who is spoiling the environment, and it is our actions of emission which are actually disturbing the quality and destroying it. The second biggest lesson that we learn is that to get clear skies without paying a hefty price like the one we did in the pandemic, we need to have a strategy in place, as I mentioned earlier. And that strategy is to bring in newer technologies, particularly for developing nations, which cannot afford to give up development at this stage. Then we should also be looking at one issue that everybody in the globe today talks about: sustainable development. I think it's time that we started talking with equal emphasis on sustainable consumption. It's not just sustainable development which will help us, it is sustainable consumption. Mahatma Gandhi once said that the nature has enough for everybody's need, but not for everybody's need. That is the principle on which we need to work. We should not draw excessive things from the nature. We need to protect it, as I said earlier. And once you have sustainable consumption, change in lifestyle, I think we will have, if not completely blue skies right now, skies as blue as this. And to do all this, there is another element which I must emphasize on, and that is partnership. All Commonwealth countries are here today, and I think we have to have cross-country partnership to do this. Clear skies are not limited by boundaries. We as countries get together, both in terms of resource, technology, knowledge, and experience sharing, so that we create a common platform where we can handle things in a better way and get better air quality all over us. Because, as I said earlier, air quality is about life. So if we really want to do it, I think this is the time, and this is the lesson that we have learned, that if we don't get our act together and we are not in it together, I don't think we find a solution to this problem very soon. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I really look forward to the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mitra. Let me hand over now to Sir Richard Bourne, who is the founder of Ramphal Institute. Richard will go ahead and introduce our other panelists for today. And then if he has any questions for our keynote speaker, he will also post that. Richard, hand over to you.
And sorry, my apologies, Christian. I dropped off my laptop. I've come on my phone, so my apologies.
Are you there?
Yes, Christian, I'm here.
So, Mr. Christian, why don't you go ahead while I try to connect Mr. Richard Bourne. So.
Okay. At the outset, I'd like to say that FICCI hosts this with the Ramphal Institute, especially on a topic of clean air, since Ramphal was way ahead of his time in advocating environmental issues. Now, it's said that necessity is the mother of invention. And as David has mentioned and Secretary Mishra has mentioned, we have learned in these last few months that clean air is not just the good old days. It can be a reality even today. The second aspect, which is rather unintended and unfortunate, is cough. Because I think that is something which we are all paranoid about in the COVID era. And in the old days, in our polluted cities, cough was the norm. So I think clean air has become a necessity. And as humankind, we have to reinvent ourselves. Now, from Indian perspective, as FICCI, we have been working from our environment committee and other committees on various aspects of clean air. But if I may just put them in three main groups. One is linked to, uncontrolled combustion, which is largely biomass and a wide spectrum of bio-waste, whether it's urban or farm waste. Then there's the controlled combustion, which could be in power plants or it could be in internal combustion engines. Now, for both of these sources, There have been technological solutions, there are business models, and while we might question the efficacy of implementation, we probably should be able to progress on that. There's a third source, which is construction and demolition waste. Now, out here, I don't find as much emphasis on the evolution in businesses. For instance, a simple thing like enhancing prefabrication in urban construction. So this is one area which requires more focus. If I might just make a general suggestion, we might treat energy efficiency and water efficiency as a norm and give more weightage for buildings which give more emphasis to C&D waste management. So I'd like to end by recalling words from the speech of Sir Rampal, made at the launch of his book, Glimpses of a Global Life. These are glimpses only, and to hope that in their own way, they conjure up, especially for those who cherish them. Hopefully, this webinar will have a similar impact among the participants. Thank you.
Richard Bourne, are you there with us? Seems to have lost Richard. Richard, are you there with us?
Yeah, I'm with you. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes. Let me turn it over to you now, Richard. So.
Thank you. In that case, everybody, I'd like to invite Professor Frank Kelly, who has done a lot of work on pollution, air pollution in London, to give a statement for us.
Thank you, Richard. So I think my presentation was going to be put up at this point. So let me know if you can see my screen, please.
I can't see it. I know that Shruti Isha had got it, has got the images.
Mr.
Professor
Kelly, you
Kelly,
can share your screen. You can share your screen.
Thank you. Can you see it now? Can you see it now?
No, I can only see you.
Oh dear. Okay.
Would you like to talk us through, Frank? The images will come up.
So, yes, do let me know if they do appear. So the first thing is, clearly, as you all appreciate, as in many cities, traffic is a major contributor to air pollution. In London, approximately 2/3 of all the nitrogen dioxide comes from vehicles, mostly diesel vehicles, and over half the PM 2.5 particles come from vehicles as well. So as we've had this massive decrease in the transport on our roads, then clearly there has been a dramatic improvement in air quality, and we have blue skies, as you can see in the next slide.
We've got, yes, good. The first slide has come up.
Okay. So we now have lovely blue skies, we have birds singing, etc. And the question is really, how has lockdown influenced air quality? And everybody thinks that there's a very simple association between the two. But in reality, the slides aren't moving forward from me, so if someone else is in control, please move forward. And to the next one. Thank you. So in reality, how has air quality improved? So if we could move forward. And next one. So this is one of our main monitoring sites. The two graphs on the left is for NO2 and NOx, And on the left-hand side of each of those graphs is the pre-lockdown data. And you can see that it's up and down every day, as you can see. And as we went into lockdown, then the concentrations have fallen, as shown by that average concentration, the blue line. However, if you look at the particle concentrations on the right-hand side, PM10 and PM2.5, we actually have observed an increase in particle concentrations during lockdown. So the situation is complicated, and we always do see these increases in early spring in the UK, and this comes from agricultural use of fertilizers. So it's not just the traffic. We've had the farming activities continuing, obviously, during lockdown, and so therefore, yes, some air quality indices have increased and improved, and other ones have not. So that's one of the messages that we need to remember from a policy point of view. Can I have the next slide, please? So the question is, what do we do now? Do we take the fork in the road which takes us left, or the one that takes us right? We have a real choice here before us, and certainly policymakers need to make that right, informed choice. Next slide. If we take the road to the left, then we go back to where we were, and we have all the pollution that we experienced previously. If we take the road to the right, then maybe we can actually use this pandemic experience. Next slide. So in London, we're really actively saying, could we actually be having a car-free city here to stay? Prior to the lockdown, we actually had in the City of London agreed to close several roads to traffic. But now that discussion has extended and moved forward considerably, and we will have a number of roads which will, after the lockdown eases, be traffic-free. And this is being driven by public opinion. Next slide, please. Because a recent survey has shown that more than 1 in 3 of us say that the roads actually feel safer now for walking and cycling during lockdown. Next slide. Over half of us say that we would do more cycling and walking after lockdown, and it's actually impossible to buy a new bicycle currently in London because of the stocks that are all gone. Next slide. And 4 out of 5 of us say that with active travel will be easier if we have pedestrianised city centres, i.e. we keep the traffic out of them. So the public is really pushing for these changes to be maintained after lockdown finishes. And the local government, the GLA here, next slide please, they are actually on the same page because they're really pushing forward the various low emission transport, public transport possibilities with our hydrogen electric buses and of course the electric black cab. Final slide, please. So, thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to join in the discussion following the next series of speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Frank. That was excellent. And I would like to now move to Dr. Dolapo Fasawi, the General Manager and Chief Executive of the Lagos State Environmental Protection Agency. As I think everybody knows, Lagos is the industrial and business dynamo for Nigeria. So can we have Dr. Fasawi, please?
Good afternoon, everyone.
Welcome.
Shruti, do you have my slides?
Yes, we have. We'll just put it across if you want. Yeah.
I'm trying to share it. However, it's obvious that the environment is our Commonwealth, and whatever affects the environment in A affects the environment in B, albeit in different proportions. I listened to Professor Kelly carefully, and it's interesting to see that their PM has increased due to agriculture. But here in Nigeria, I would want to categorically say that our major source of air pollutants is road transport. There's usually heavy traffic, high fuel consumption, and emissions from industries who have continued to use old technology. And most of our power comes from diesel and petrol. In terms of industries, like I said, we are still somewhat caught between the old technologies and trying to move into newer, more energy efficient machines. The truth is, our per capita emission here in Lagos would be very low, considering the population and very poor electricity supply. A lot of activities during the lockdown were shut down, yes. There were no vehicles on the road, yes. Our skies were as blue as the come, and for the first time, we had one of the best AQIs in the world. But the conversation here today is this something that can be business as usual, PM 2.5 and PM 10, or the environment would have to force us into making our skies clear? I was at a discussion yesterday where someone said to the audience that the environment has a way of remediating itself. And it was a big discussion that could COVID be a way of clearing the skies? I would like to disagree with that and say that human activity and our habits, and also the social and economic factors of any large city, mega city, Lagos is attaining status of mega city, are the major culprits in polluting the air. In Lagos State, a couple of pockets of studies have been done. And when we think of source apportionment, it is usually from vehicular emissions. During the lockdown, the roads were empty, the sky was clear, and even industries were shut down. So the smogs and the smokes were not there. I would like to talk a little bit about health impact assessment of clear air. In Lagos State here, studies have been done that have shown that 75% of people going into hospitals, government hospitals, with upper respiratory tract infections are due to air pollution, caused by air pollution, caused by pollens and particulate matter in the air. Now let's look at this in terms of economics. The amount of money spent on taking care of this group of people, manpower downtime, and also generally morbidity and mortality and our health indices are grossly affected. Now in Nigeria, urbanization, in Lagos especially, I would want to say is a culprit. We are expanding and building many more industries without thinking of renewable energy. But it's good news to note that the government of Nigeria and Lagos State in particular is working towards making policy statements. In short to medium term, our strategy is to lean more towards gas, CNG, compressed natural gas, and LPG. But how accessible and affordable are these things? Nigeria is very rich in gas. We would have to do a lot of advocacy, enlightenment, information, sensitization, and get a mind shift and a culture shift. It's regarding the emissions from vehicles, which I said is the major pollutant here. The government is working very hard to reinvigorate the rail system. It's unfortunate that in Nigeria, we do not have rail within the metropolis of Lagos. Can you move to my 4th slide? I want to show the transport system in Nigeria. Next. Next slide. There it is. No, previous slide. There it is. That is what we have. And the picture speaks by itself. But also we can see we're trying to decongest the roads by moving into water transportation and finding a way to put rail in the metropolis. Also, it is interesting to note that the lockdown has taught us new and smarter ways of doing things. Now we've lifted the lockdown, people are back on the road, but majority of people still work from home. Things that we were not used to before in Lagos, like webinars, Zoom meetings, working from home, have become the norm. And these are lessons learned from this pandemic. We do not all have to be on the road as much as we used to be. Fine, jobs will be lost. Fine and sad that we would depend more on technology. However, we have no choice than to think smart and work smart. If we want to retain the blue skies, then definitely we have to change our habits. Do we need pandemics to force us into having blue skies? The answer is no. But COVID has taught us a good lesson, and I hope that us policymakers and the world in general will learn from this and start to understand the importance of air quality. Thank you for listening. And there it is.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Fasawi. And let us move straight away to Dr. Tariq from Dhaka North, the Chief Town Planner in Dhaka North, for a view from the very big city of Bangladesh. I think most people know that Dhaka is split between Dhaka North and Dhaka South. Dr. Tariq is with Dhaka North. We get Dr. Tariq.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
I can hear you, but I cannot see. Yes, I can see you as well. Good.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for inviting me and the Dhaka North City Corporation for this panel discussion on COVID-19 impact on clean air. Okay, so COVID-19 pandemic is a public health emergency, as you all know. And so far in Bangladesh, around 100,000 people are infected and death is nearly 1,500. So it's increasingly alarming. From 26 March 2020, the government has imposed shutdown of the educational institute, mass transport system, and restricted the movement of people and vehicles to tackle the spread of coronavirus. But after lockdown imposed, city air quality tremendously improved. As we all know, nature comes back, allowing the environment some space to breathe. We can now see the blue skies and clean air. We can reconnect the people with nature and to realize that our actions has affected us for the air pollution. So to maintain the social distance, discouraging people to use the motor vehicle. At the same time, the people are encouraging for walking and cycling. As we all know that industrial and economic activities has been suspended. So industrial emissions has been reduced. So according to the US Consulate Air Quality Monitor system, so we always monitor the PM 2.5, and today the AQI is 78, is moderate. So if we come back to from January to June, in January 19 days were within 200 to 300. So very unhealthy situation in terms of the air quality, AQI. And 4 days is within the 300 to 400. It was very hazardous. So from February, March, when the lockdown started, you see in June, we have now 12 days is within 75 to 100 AQI. So the quality of the air has been improved tremendously. And so far, you know that Dhaka regularly ranked the top cities with the worst air quality. So we have the sources like we have the brick planes, transport, which causes the congestion and pollution, and the huge construction work. The metro mega projects are going on for metro rail, as well as the other big construction projects. And these are identified as the major sources of air pollution. And air quality declines in the dry months from October to April. Now is a monsoon, so naturally the air quality has been improved due to monsoon. And in April, Dhaka ranked second worst in AQI score 164. So breathing clean air is a human right, we all know. And when the air quality of Dhaka was deteriorating before the COVID pandemic, the government was very much active, and a writ petition was submitted in the court in December 2019 for protecting the citizens from the devastating consequences of air pollution. And government enacted the Clean Air Act draft at that time and formulated some guidelines and has given some directives. Yeah, to stop the road digging by the utility agencies, covering the construction materials, spraying water on the streets, fencing the construction sites, burning of bituminous materials and solid waste, discouraging the manual sweeping, encouraging the mechanical sweeping in the main roads, and also, you see, government imposed for the fitness of the vehicles, encouraging concrete blocks instead of the brick, and also encourage the roadside plantation, grass, etc. So what we have learned and what are the challenges we have you see forward, that according to UN environmental chief Anderson, he reiterated that nature is sending us a message that if we neglect the planet, we put our own well-being at risk. So now gradually the lockdown is being eased. Again, we can start the energy use, and the air pollution will be again increasing. And yes, the re-emergence of the economic activity will be started. We'll have to come back to the business as usual. That will diminish the environmental gains that we have got from the COVID-19, beside the health impact. So this pandemic is good or bad for the environment, depends on the political You see, that is in the end decision of the government. It's okay. So whether we'll go back to the unsustainable business as usual, or we'll give environmental recovery as a priority. This is a big question from the government decision. And at the same time, you see, no doubt that our first priority is the health. And then we have to think of our economy as a developing country. But at the same time, we'll have to look into our environment, that the lesson that we have got from the COVID-19, that yes, we can save our environment. We can again, we need to play to keep our sky blue if we can think of and if we can plan. Thank you.
Has been speaking. Well, there was a little interference in your contribution. I apologize for that. I don't know where it was coming from. But we now move to the last of our expert contributors, Mr. Vivek Bhatia, Managing Director and CEO of Thyssen Group Industries in India, who has been doing important work on commercializing stubble, I know. Over to Mr. Vivek Bhatia.
Thank you, Mr. Bourne. And firstly, I must congratulate Vicky and various other entities in getting together to really organize this very important discussion. And I think it is very pertinent that we reflect on this issue, because what we have seen is really dramatic and on many counts was not expected as we were entering the lockdown phase. So firstly, I think to put things in perspective, when we think about the National Capital Region in India, we are talking about one of the most polluted urban areas in the world. And you can look at various parameters. You can look at PM 2.5, 10 or whatever. We will be there probably in the top 3 in the most polluted areas in the world. And this is definitely a serious issue for all of us. I live in Delhi, I live in this space. And this is certainly a serious, very serious public health issue. There are costs that we incur in ensuring health, ensuring well-being, ensuring treatment. It is also a subject of intense public and political debate. There are many, many institutes reviewing the situation, trying to ascertain the sources of pollution, to the extent that last year in 2019, towards the end, even the Supreme Court of India was reviewing actively and directing action and expecting feedback from various government bodies. So we are in many ways at breaking point, and we are also in a situation that requires urgent attention. Now, 2 things become abundantly clear as a result of this lockdown phase. Firstly, major underlying drivers are local factors. And this is very important to understand, because as a consequence of the shutdown in the local areas, we saw this impact. And the second extremely important point to note is that these are rapidly reversible. The scale and the dramatic impact that we have seen on the environment and the speed with which this has happened, for me, is really the silver lining in this entire episode, which tells us that with the right interventions, with the right actions, we can really make a significant difference in the air quality on a very short time. Now, apart from this, I think there are 2 other things that we need to keep in mind. And I was listening to the presentation by Professor Kelly as well. And he made a very important observation that on some of the parameters, there was indeed a spike even during the lockdown phase. And this is also something which we must really appreciate in the context of the NCR region in India. What we have seen, and if we analyze month on month, what is the nature of pollution, and what we notice is that there is definitely a spike in the pollution level, a significant deterioration happening in the winter months. And this can be directly correlated to what we have now seen through many reports and including satellite pictures, analysis by NASA, that this is directly correlated to a surge in uh, crop stubble burning, which is indeed creating a massive cloud of pollution, which is then traversing large parts of North India. So, under the circumstances, I'm perhaps one of the few people representing businesses on the panel today. I think the solutions are not entirely limited to policy interventions, but definitely business entities also have a significant role to play in addressing the situation. So policy is on one side, but making or enabling the ground to implement those policies through technological interventions is definitely a role where business entities can play a significant role in accelerating the entire process of achieving improvement in the situation with regards to air quality. Now, if we come back to the crop stubble issue, what we really see is that in the winter months, as the farmers are going through one crop cycle into the next, due to the intensive cropping patterns, there is a really limited point in time that they have to turn around their farms and be ready for the next crop. And this is really precipitating the situation where, out of sheer desperation, they are setting fire to crop stubble on their fields, leading to a massive surge in pollution levels. So there is really no alternative that is currently available to them. But this is exactly the place, exactly the kind of issue where the right kind of technological interventions can really have a fast and dramatic impact in changing status quo. And we have been debating this at various forums, discussing this at various forums in India, including at FICCI. And fortunately, there is a lot that we get in terms of technology which can support in addressing this. There are a variety of different technologies which can provide a solution for this. There can be briquetting and utilization in power plants. There can be various boilers which can be set up which are able to sustainably consume these fuels. And I think providing those technological interventions can definitely make a big impact both to farmer income, in industrializing those rural areas, in generating employment, and of course having a significant positive impact on health and pollution levels. Now, if we also look at the sources of pollution, and again there are many studies which are there to address it. And this I said at the start, there are many local factors which have also a significant impact on air quality, which is resulting in the short-term improvement as a consequence of the lockdown. Definitely, road transportation is one factor, but also in a developing country environment like India, there are additional factors which have a significant role playing. One of them, of course, is industrial activity around the NCR region. Another aspect is construction activities, where some of the panelists, I think, very wisely indicated that we should also reassess construction practices. And apart from that, I think what is something really startling, which I find when I look at the data with regards to North Indian cities, is dust. And this is something which is a combination of the environment, which is very dry especially during these times of the year, and also the nature of the green belt deterioration which has taken place. And what we find is that there is a lot of dust that is accumulating on in various parts of the city, and especially when we have vehicular movement, this is again constantly being circulated and dispersed into the environment. And as you have a reduction in the green cover, this problem only gets amplified. So road transport directly as a source of pollution, but also road transport and vehicular movement leading to the dispersion of dust, which is simply not properly managed on the streets, is also a significant contributor, which is amplified by various actions. So, if I were to summarize, I think in combination to short and specific and precise local factors, there are also various seasonal factors, and definitely I think policy has a significant role to play in addressing the issues that we have and setting a certain direction for industry to play. But at the same time, I think policy must also think how do they create a environment which is really leveraging industry and bringing them into the whole process of contributing towards a solution to many of these figures, many of these issues. And then definitely, I think it will be a win-win situation because policy alone will not solve it. It needs to be coupled with investment. It needs to be coupled with technology. And definitely on the last two parts, the private sector, the industry definitely can play a significant role in supporting the improvement of air quality. So, thank you very much. I think you're on mute, so we are not able to hear you.
We're not hearing you. Yes, there you are.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you now. We're not able to hear you earlier.
Okay. I don't know whether we've got any questions in from people who've been watching the webinar, because if so, we have about 15, 20 minutes. We should put them to the panel. Do we have any questions?
I do have a question. Let me pose one from here at the Ramphal Institute. I'm quite interested in hearing from Professor Kelly on what he believes should be key policy considerations for especially small developing countries to put in place. I know the issue of air quality is a bigger one in mega cities, but it's also the utilization of diesel technologies proliferates in smaller economies. You just don't tend to have, because of population sizes, the same visual effect. What suggestions would Professor Kelly have for small developing economies going forward?
Well, clearly they have challenges before them in respect of being able to catch up with their economic needs and development. However, I would encourage them to seek support from other sources to be able to encourage investment in cleaner technologies where those are going to be possible. We also have all learned that even in London these days, we're delivering a lot of local goods in the last mile using delivery cycles. And I think things like that, we wouldn't have considered doing that even 5 years ago. And I think there's major lessons to be learned there about how we move goods around. And I think the other major lesson that I've learned during this lockdown is the fact that we need to move back to local food production. and to ensure that we're not wasting a lot of energy by moving food around vast distances, really. We need to encourage local distribution. So those would be the main things I think that came to mind.
Thank you very much.
Could I put a question to Mr. Mishra, please? Which is, do you think that there is scope for more regulation or more incentives for good practice to improve air quality in India? We listened to the chief planner for Dhaka North saying that an act of parliament and public pressure was very important. Do you see some scope for regulation and also incentives to make change?
Regulations in India are very strong. We have all the laws in place. The issue boils down to their proper implementation. But I do feel that it is not just a legal framework and law that is going to solve the problem. That's one aspect, one push. What we need to do in a larger context is get people on board. And those who do well, just as you said, incentivize them to do better. There are many good stories doing the round. We need to encourage people to adopt them. And at the same time, now we've reached a stage in India, particularly in Delhi and some of the other metros, the Indo-Gangetic Plain in particular, where I think we need to enforce the rule of law with far more strictness than we have done today. But I think the winner lies in getting people on board.
Thank you very much. I would like to put a question to Dr. Fasawi, please. Dr. Fasawi in Lagos. I know Dr. Fasawi has done important work in getting rid of single-use plastic bags with the public in Lagos, a tremendous achievement. And I just wondered whether that kind of approach, which I suspect involved both regulation but also encouragement, could be applied to improving air quality in the city.
Thank you, Richard. I need to correct you. We banned single-use plastic in the agency, in my agency. And yes, you're right. But before we banned it, we made the alternative available, affordable, and sustainable. Also, there was enforcement and fines for people who violated this rule. But before then, we had spent months on advocacy, talking about single-use plastics, the effect of single-use plastics to the environment, to our health, to drainages, even to the ecosystem. We found fishes and animals, suffocated by plastic. Yes, it's possible, but there would need to be a lot of political will, affordability and availability of alternatives. And, I spoke about our midterm plan to put rail in the metropolis and talk to industries to switch. We have some good news. A lot of industries with who are still burning fossil fuels, bakeries, for example, we give them incentives to use LPG. That has worked. Incentives have worked. And I'm also aware that the federal government is looking into distributing free cylinders for LPG. The issue is we have to consider the social and economic situation of any space we're in before we make such hard stands.
Good. I think there was a question that came in about fertilizer. Somebody sent in a question.
Richard, I'm happy to address that, yes. So I referred to fertilizers as being a source of particulate pollution in the springtime here in the UK, and in fact across Europe as well. So we're talking about ammonia-based fertilizers, which will enter the air from the land, and there, through atmospheric chemistry, they form what we call secondary PM2.5 particles. So they're not the primary particles that we get with combustion, but they're particles which are formed by atmospheric chemistry. And ammonia is a very, very good seeding chemical for these particles.
Presumably this is an issue also in rural Bangladesh and rural North India. Other countries are also using ammonia-based fertilizers.
I would assume so, but of course, that it's probably dominated by primary emissions through the stubble burning, I would have thought, at many times of the year.
Could I ask members of the panel whether the COVID lockdown and also the economic impact of the COVID nightmare has set back plans to improve air quality? We have had some reports, for example, from the city of Manchester here in Britain, that they may have to postpone their air zone, I think, because of shortage of funds. I just wondered whether this was also an issue in other cities, in other countries. Mr. Mitra?
Funds, lack of funds would not be an issue in India. The National Clean Air Program, which was launched last year, has in fact got additional funding for the current year. And that is government priority, where funding will be made available, and taken a strategy of choosing cities and ranking them in such a way that we are able to focus on city level plan and actually implement it with the funds. So the COVID actually will not be disturbing that plan.
Thank you very much. How about Dr. Tariq and Dhaka? Can we, Tariq?
Yeah. So we are working with the C40, the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, and we are developing the air pollution master plan for the city, control the master plan, control the air pollution. So we have the climate change action plan for the city we are preparing. So we are giving emphasis more on the both the regulatory framework as well as the incentive to give the people, so that we can encourage the people to reduce the pollution of air.
But Dr. Tariq, have you suffered because of the financial impact of COVID? Has that threatened the finance that you need for the work you are doing?
Yeah, of course, you see, of course, there is a big impact for the economic shutdown as well. So from the cities to develop some strategy and action plan and the implement, it's not a big fund is needed for that. But you see, we need some guidance to implement the action plan.
Right, good. Now, my final question, and then shortly we must hand over to Rita, because she will have to wind up this event. My final question is, do you see opportunity for in this field? The Ramphal Institute is developing a Commonwealth program, which we hope to develop with a conference early next year in New Delhi. And we have 8 partner organizations. There is a lot of interest in this. Do you think there is some scope here? When we had our previous conference in 2018, it emerged proposing that there be a UN to clean air and other ideas. Opportunity for Commonwealth cooperation here. I would be grateful for the different persons to comment. Dr.
Richard,
Kirkland. Yes. Dr. Tariq?
Yeah. We want to continue the effort that we have taken already. As I mentioned that you see, we have the port directives also to go for the clean air, something like that. And yes, of course, we need to join the Rampal Institute for any type of collaboration or any kind of, the the meetings or any webinars or something like that. We are glad to accept and join.
Thank
Richard,
you
can
very
I come?
much. Yes, Mr. Please.
Richard, just to get straight to your question, we've been talking about a collaboration between countries of the Commonwealth for long, and we've not done it. This is an unfortunate moment, but a God-sent opportunity when we must get our act together, create a common platform, share technologies, share knowledge, share best practices, and at least show that within ourselves we can do a much better job of improving air quality in our countries.
Thank you very much for that remark, Mr. Mishra. And Dr. Fasawi in Lagos, what do you think?
I totally agree with Mr. Mishra. When we share our experiences and we get support, it moves us forward. Right now, the World Bank is supporting Lagos State in measuring air quality, and they're bringing machines and technical support so we can do source apportionment and massive advocacy. Yes, we need collaboration.
Very much indeed. I'm now going to hand over, first of all, to David Gomez to make some final remarks, and then I know he will invite Rita Roy Chowdhury to wind up this very valuable webinar. So over to you, David, first for a minute or two, and then Rita.
Sorry,
Thank you very much.
David, sorry to interrupt, but there were few questions that came in the question box as well. Do we take up those questions or address those later?
Rita,
I think
it's
we
a
have
matter of
for one
time.
or two. Yeah, let's do that. Yeah.
If we have time for two, yes, please.
David, would you like to read out the questions, or
I can't see them here, Rita, so I'm not seeing any
okay.
of the questions. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So there were questions addressed to Mr. Mishra also, that he talked about combustion being the main cause. The question is, do you think pricing for health impact through pricing of carbon is needed to encourage use of greener fuel? So that's one question, Mr. Mishra. The other, if I can just mention the question. Dr. Tariq, could you
Sorry, before
kindly
you go on, can
mute
we ask the other
yourself, please?
panelists to please mute your microphones, because we're getting heavy feedback. So can the panelists who are not speaking mute their microphones?
The second question from Mr. Mishra that has come is from Pratima Singh, which says, when you talk about including citizens in policy making, do we have any framework in mind for including citizens in the process? So these two questions for Mr. Mishra.
Okay, thank you. Can I just answer them? On the first one, on carbon pricing, etc., it's one way. We need to look towards a better e-mobility regime. We need to look towards a better fuel regime, which is far cleaner. I do appreciate that it is not possible immediately, but we'll have to deploy all these tools put together at the end of the day, including public transport, to resolve this issue of combustion vehicles. And combustion in Delhi is about transport, or Delhi, for that matter, in India is about transport, it's about industry, it's about power. Now, to the second question on the involving people and their, yes, the Ministry of Environment and Forest does have a framework. There is no decision, no notification which is issued under the Environment Protection Act by the Ministry of Environment and Forest without public consultation. And these consultations are done for 60 days at a stretch. So I would request that that is the ideal time for people to actually participate. Apart from that, there are other ways of associating with the ministry's programs, but the primary way to influence policy would be to participate whenever the government puts up a draft notification and asks people for their comments.
Thank you. There is one question for Professor Kelly from Pratima Singh. We have been promoting public transportation. However, considering the pandemic conditions and fear among the citizens for using the public transportation, what would be the strategy going forward for various governments?
So this is a real challenge, clearly, because we need to maintain social distancing. And until we either have a vaccine available or understand better the outdoor transmission of the virus, I think we need to be very careful about our public transport messages. In London, we have put a lot of effort into widening bike lanes, adding new widening pavement so people can move about the city without using public transport. We've developed some apps which allows them to replace their normal tube or bus journey by walking and cycling. So a whole range of different measures I think are required over the next few months, or maybe more than that in some countries, until we're sure that we've moved out of this pandemic situation. Post-pandemic, I think we need to make major investments in clean public transport across the world. Thank you.
I have a question here for Professor Kelly as well, so let me just read it. They want to know about the capacity for social science research on behavior change and alternative well-being indicators to GDP and economic growth.
In there is enormous, opportunity here for social science research. The impact of the lockdown has really led us into a situation which we have very little understanding of. There will be a whole range of different effects on different individuals, and we really need to make sure we understand that should we find ourselves in this situation again. Clearly, the economic impacts of this situation is also very varied. There will be some individuals who have been hit very hard because of maybe losing their employment at the moment or shortly when we come out of lockdown. But beyond that, there is enormous opportunities as well for new businesses to start up. And I think what many countries should be trying to do would be to look for investment in green technology, which I think all of us will need as we move forward through this situation. So there are opportunities as clearly as well as problem areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kelly. Do you have any other questions from your end?
No, I think that's it, David.
I mean, from my end, what the messages that have come across are pretty clear. One, there is absolutely a need for more effective collaboration across the Commonwealth. It is clear that what's happening in Dhaka, London, Nigeria, there's much talk about around individual places, but not much being put in place in terms of creating perhaps an ecosystem to allow for connectivity to happen more effectively. And that's important because if we will redress the issue of air pollution at a global level, then it has to be a global solution. It can't be piecemeal. Professor Kelly raised a couple of really good points that I wanted to touch on. Local food production is one. Regional and global value chains and production systems have become such that smaller developing economies and developing economies have become hyper dependent on those for meeting their food needs. So there are significant food insecurities that currently exist that have been exposed by the pandemic. I think this is a time to press that reset button and to see how perhaps you can move back to having some of the countries moving back to local production. That is going to be absolutely key. Consumption patterns will have to change, absolutely. But the onus is going to be now on the citizen to make that decision effectively. Green technology uptakes is another area that was mentioned. And it's interesting that in countries, particularly in the Caribbean, policies that are in place are still not friendly for the uptake of green technologies. I can list off 4 or 5 countries right now that actually prohibit the utilization and uptake of green technologies because of whatever the, reasons they have. But that is not a situation that can continue in the future. Most of the small island economies, most of the smaller countries still are very dependent on diesel vehicles, on diesel generated electricity and energy, on alternative forms of energy that uses or burns a lot of carbon fuels. Those are things that will have to change. I think there is the space now within the Commonwealth as well as outside of that for perhaps changes to take place. But events like this are important, not only at a global level, but also at a regional and sub-regional level, to see if we can now engender the type of policy changes that are required, our countries need to start considering. Perhaps there is a space or a need for us to give them some kind of assistance in looking at what kind of policy considerations would be helpful. Rita.
Thank you, David. I think it's been an excellent session, and it has been interesting to get the insights from experiences in London, Lagos, Dhaka, and New Delhi. And the key messages are very, very clear that, you know, there needs to be policy and strategic shifts to sustain what we have seen as the gains out of this pandemic, and that we don't need pandemics like this to really tell us that we need clean air. We need to build on partnerships and collaborations and create a common platform for sharing technology and best practices. And the most important thing is that the countries should look at fast tracking deployment of renewable energy, sustainable mobility, allocating resources to green technologies, and breaking down the barriers to technology availability and innovations. Also, what we heard is that the sources are many. Whereas there are controlled combustion, and the models and the needs of technology intervention and investments would be different there from the uncontrolled combustion sources from farm waste and biomass, where I think a lot of innovation and new business models will have to be looked at, including investments, is a very important direction that has come from this discussion. And also another important source is the construction, where policy action needs to be driven towards. So it has been insightful really to hear that it is not just policy, but business models and technology interventions, including the move towards public transportation, towards non-motorized transportation and infrastructure, and having emission-free zones in cities. That would be very, very critical. Also, the move towards inland water transport, something that India is seeing very actively. And I just want to announce here that next week, FICCI is releasing an India roadmap for low carbon and sustainable mobility. So the momentum really has to come from policy and roadmaps going forward. And while this has taught us the importance of clean air, I think what the panelists are saying is that we've also discovered new ways of work, travel, and networking with people. So a shift in the mindset and a change in habits is needed to continue and sustain the gains that we see post-COVID-19 recovery as well. So I would really like to thank all our esteemed distinguished panelists and speakers here. Thank you to Mr. C.K. Mishra for his keynote address, to Professor Frank Kelly, to Dr. Fasawe and Dr. Tariq for their insights from what they're experiencing in their countries and the policy actions that are driving them towards sustaining such gains. Also, Mr. Krishan, the chair of the FICCI Climate Change Committee, for his insightful remarks. And Mr. Vivek Bhatia, who has brought another business perspective to the whole discussion from India, from the very local issue of stubble burning that we are facing in India as a major cause of air pollution in the city of Delhi and around Delhi. So thank you to all the esteemed speakers, and a big thank you to David and to Richard and to the Ramphal Institute for this great partnership. We look forward to building momentum on this discussion on how we can have collaboration amongst the Commonwealth countries in this important area of air quality. And I would like to thank all the participants who have joined us here. We have a very, very diverse participation, not just from business industry, but from institutions and policymakers as well, and also from students. So thank you very much for joining us in this webinar. And we look forward to hearing from you, your feedback and your questions going further. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rita, and everyone have a nice weekend, and hopefully it's nice and sunny.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. Bye. Blue skies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.